The music career of my next guest has spanned 4 decades, and during that time, he's sold millions of albums and has had 20 top 10 worldwide hits. His new CD is out now called Leo Sayer, The Greatest Hits, and to talk about that and his love of motorcars, it's a very good morning to the one and only Leo Sayer. Good morning, Leo.
How you doing, mate?
Great to speak to you, my friend.
It's really good. No worries.
Look, congratulations on this new album. It looks fantastic. Was it a bit therapeutic putting together a greatest hits album?
Well, over the years, I've done quite a few, but this was a good crack with, a real great support from Warner Australia, it must be said, to Leo. Now, how would you like to do this? Of course, the only thing I think that I would have done slightly differently to, what market forces will always push is to have put the songs chronologically, because then you really do see the journey through the career. You see it start with The Show Must Go On and the musical knowledge that I gained, and the techniques of recording and everything grow with time, you know what I mean? But other than that, it's really, I think, the kind of almost the perfect compilation, because we got hold of all of my original tapes, so the thing sounds better than ever. And the other thing is it's a true Australian compilation for the first time.
When you look at your career and seeing all this on one CD, you realise there's just so many wonderful songs there and so many great memories. It must be great for you to put that into, as you say, into this one package and just look back over your career. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, people ask me, how do I feel about it now? And even questions like, do you mind singing the same songs again and again? But look, I love it, because the main thing is that we worked very hard right from the early days to make records that sounded great. And I was part of that process, and although I wasn't always, you'd often work with pretty bossy producers, but I always pushed like mad for great sounding records. And I think that, I was a pretty good technical singer on a lot of those records, and technical writer as well, so that, we end up with a product that doesn't sound, a lot of records from the 70s, they sound dated, and these don't sound dated, and that's what I'm most proud of.
Now, we're going to change subject a little bit and talk to you about, because I know you love cars as well as you love music. Yeah. I know you love cars. I heard, though, a bit of a rumour that you were a little bit of a late bloomer when it came to getting your licence.
I was, yes. I didn't drive until I was about, I must have been, almost 30.
Really?
Mostly because, you see, in my early career, before I was a singer, I was working in London as a commercial artist, and you didn't need a car in London. Everything was there, the tube, taxis, buses. And I lived right in Soho, and right next to the studio where I worked most of the time. So, it was pretty easy, really. And there was no point in driving. And the other thing was, I was kind of, being a motor racing fan and being a fan of all my heroes, I was terrified that, I would never be as good as what I thought I could, wanted to be.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is that the first week that I got my license was also a week that I got invited by the McLaren team and Ron Dennis to come down and drive a Formula One car, because I was always around Formula One, but I wasn't a driver. And so I drove my little BMW up to the Silverstone circuit and proceeded to do 40 laps with John Watson in a McLaren with a Cosworth DFV in the back, Formula One car that was being driven that season by Niki Lauda and John Watson. And it was awe-inspiring, scary, and wonderful stuff. I felt like the Stig, it was just incredible. I was piling around it must be said, a wet and slightly frosty and icy Silverstone, and John taught me how to drive the car, basically, and racing drivers are wonderful tutors, and took me around in my car and showed me the lines and everything, and then took me around in a sports car, and then gradually I got in the car, and apart from the difficulty of actually getting it into gear and leaving the pits, because they're very, very tricky things. They have a very narrow power band in first gear, so you stall it and you stall it and you stall it, but eventually you get to learn how to hold the clutch just right. Eventually I got it going, and it was the most fantastic experience. I think I managed to get it into about 7th gear down the hangar straight. As John Watson said, he said, you don't need to brake, just turn the wheel, it will go around. And, I braked, but...
I think I would too.
But it did go round. It went round on rails. It was like Skeletrix.
Wow, that's incredible. And did Ron Dennis know you only had your licence for a week when he gave you the ignition key?
No, but the part of the Grand Prix thing is that you've got to fool people. I remember my friend Gerhard Berger, who was going for a drive in the Arrows Formula One team, and he fell down. He came from the Tyrol in Austria, where he came from, and he fell down a mountain over Christmas time, and he'd already promised that he was going to drive for the Arrows Formula One team, and a good guy and a great friend, Jackie Oliver, he had to go and see him to negotiate the last parts of the contract, talk up his fee, and and he went there with kind of like, and we called him Frankenstein because he had a scar. Right, he was followed in the crash by a neurosurgeon who just happened to be on the road that day and jumped down, got a Medivac helicopter that held his neck in place and literally saved his life. And a week later, he was in negotiating with the Formula One team, persuading him that he was fit. You see, so you don't, a lot of people, and Jackie Oliver was mad, months later, finding, Jesus Christ, he was ill when I took him on. But he did a good job, of course, as those guys always do. I mean, the thing about hanging around with Formula One drivers, and the funny thing about these guys, they really are superhuman. It's a little bit like comparing an act down at the local pub with U2,
Yeah.
These are super people, they're superheroes, and what they do is quite extraordinary. So it's great fun and very inspiring for a lad who loved motor racing as a kid, grew up with Sterling Moss and Jimmy Clark as heroes, to be actually, I'm in that wonderful position that I get close to them.
And I think that's, again, a great thing, Leo, when you see a lot of the Formula One telecast and you often pop up in some of those shots around the pit. So you still get round to Formula One races these days?
Actually, this year I haven't made it to a race because I was sailing abroad and I took a 4-month trip out of Australia right when the Australian Grand Prix was going on. March the 20th, I was on my way to Singapore to join the Cunard Queen Victoria. So I missed that race, and I always make the Australian Grand Prix every year. But this year I missed it. So I haven't been to any others, and I'm just debating whether to pop over to Singapore in a couple of weeks' time. But I don't think I'm going to have time. We've got a guy over in the States called Will Power. What a great name, eh?
It's great.
And there's a pretty fabulous story that when he needed a break and he was going over to race Champ Car in America, a certain Mark Webber, gave him some money to get his career moving and give him the money to get over to America to continue. And so that's really good.
And you're right, a lot of people probably don't know that story.
No, so Mark's got a big heart as well as being a champion himself, and let's not forget that he survived a terrible accident. And rather like Gerhard Berger we were talking about earlier, in the same kind of way, managed to persuade his boss Christian Horner at the team and Dietrich Mateschitz, who runs Red Bull, he is Red Bull, that he was fit to drive the car when really he was not. So these guys are made of tough stuff, so that's why I'm proud to say, Formula One drivers rather than musicians are my heroes.